Varmt välkomna till dagens samtal om No Excuses. Inga ursäkter för dåliga skolresultat. Nyligen har vi i Moderaterna berättat att vi kommer att föreslå detta inför vår partistämma här senare i höst. Det handlar om att hämta inspiration från USA och Storbritannien där man i över 30 års tid har haft skolor som har drivits utifrån en princip om inga ursäkter för dåliga skolresultat, framförallt för elever i utanförskapsområden. Och vi menar att en del av den här metoden bör vi inspireras av i Sverige. Och med mig idag har jag därför två gäster. Vi kommer därför också byta till engelska. First of all, I want to welcome you, Rob Peal, who is joint head of West London Free School. One of the schools that have amazing results and also run according to some form of principle, with no excuses. Is that a fair description?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we also have Gabriel Heller Sahlgren, who is a researcher and have done a lot of research into no excuses, among other things, we should say. Warm welcome to you as well.
Thank you very much.
And I thought I'd start off by giving you the word Rob Peal. What would you say is unique with the school that you were running?
I would say that the no excuses approach that we have when we set up in 2011, we were one of the first free schools, a policy inspired by Sweden. So it's lovely to come to the home of the policy that inspired our creation. We were quite unique back then, but it's becoming increasingly common, the no excuses approach that we have. And in terms of, I think the interesting thing about no excuses is it has two separate meanings, which are linked but distinct. And that's one of the reasons I think it's a really nice concept to have when you're thinking about education reform. And the first aspect is that you don't make excuses on the basis of pupil socio-economic background. And that you used to hear the whole time in the English education debate. The phrase that would really, really aggravate me was these kids. These kids from single parent families, or these kids from more deprived backgrounds, or these kids who are recently arrived in the UK and speak English as a second language. These kids would routinely be used as an excuse for why your school wasn't doing better. And I think the person who encapsulated why that was a problem, it's unusual, a strange place to find it, but it was George Bush. He had a speech where he described this as the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I think that's lovely because it's soft in that it seems sympathetic. It seems like a progressive, thoughtful, compassionate thing to acknowledge someone's background and make allowances. But actually what it becomes in a school is bigotry. It becomes you setting a different standard and a different expectation of pupils because of poverty or because of ethnicity or because of background. And that's something we were determined not to do when we set up as a school. And we had the same academic expectations for all pupils, and we thought all of them would be capable of achieving in line with the rest of their peers. And then the second aspect of no excuses that was fundamental to the school when it was set up is no excuses in terms of pupil behaviour. We have very high expectations. We have things in our school that 20 years ago in the UK would have been derided as militaristic and as unforgivably rigid, but are now actually pretty commonplace. Pupils line up before going into lessons. That happens 3 times a week in the school 3 times a day in the school playground. We have silent transitions between lessons to make sure it's a calm and orderly atmosphere. If pupils misbehave, they stay behind and they write lines. It's an old-fashioned style of detention, and these all exist to make sure that we can say to the pupils, we expect the most of you and we don't expect you to make any excuses. That makes it sound like a really unpleasant place. It's not. It's a hugely warm atmosphere. It's a very loving, caring school. And actually, the final thing I would say about what makes it unique is prior to teaching at this school where I'm now the head teacher, I taught in a very standard English school, and that was an excuses school. There were excuses made for these kids the entire time. And it was a horrible atmosphere. You endlessly had to shout at the children. It was very them and us. It was antagonistic. The pupils weren't behaving. The teachers were frustrated. And our school is a much calmer, much more warm environment because we're strict, because we have high expectations, because we have this no excuses culture.
That's very, very interesting. And just a quick follow-up on that. Do you get to select your students, or how do they find you?
No, not at all. We are what in England is called a comprehensive school, which means pupils of all academic abilities and all economic backgrounds come to the school. And we actually have in our admissions, we make sure that the proportion of pupils from deprived backgrounds is exactly in line with the borough average, borough being the local area that we're in, to make sure that we can always, hand on heart, honestly say our school is entirely reflective of the area that we live in. So it has nationally average level of deprivation. So it's not incredibly deprived, but neither is it a very elite school in terms of socioeconomic status. Has twice the proportion of people speaking English as a foreign language as the national average, and it has roughly the same proportion of pupils with special educational needs. So we are a very, very normal school in terms of our intake. In terms of our outcome, we are one of the top 10 schools in the country at 16.
That's very, very impressive. Gabriel Heller Sahlgren, you are a researcher, and you've looked into a lot of the research that's been done into this model, No Excuses, in both the US and the UK. What are the main takeaways from your perspective? What does the research say? What are the evidence?
The evidence is pretty clear in the sense that these schools, both in the UK and in the US, are one of the most evidence-based model we have today, given the fact that it's been conducted, this type of research been conducted by Nobel Prize winners in American economics, as a result of having free schools in America or charter schools in America being forced to use lotteries. We've been able to compare like for a very long time the kids who are randomly selected into these schools and how they perform. And I mean, we're talking about huge effects in charter schools in Boston, Louisiana, all over the country, but not only in charter schools. So these kind of policies have actually been introduced into American public schools as well. So obviously, Rob has mentioned some of them, and obviously have a strict behavior system. Another policy that's often used is a school uniform, which I know you also have in your school. I also want to highlight that it's not just about discipline. It's as Rob also highlighted. It's incredibly welcoming and warm. So it's not this kind of militaristic, old-style, cold authority. You contrast that with the word would be warm authority, tough love. It's really, the school is really there to help the kids survive and thrive against all odds, really, because some of them come from very, very deprived backgrounds. And so that's, I think also one thing to highlight about this model is something that you didn't mention, which is the teaching. The teaching is incredibly teacher-led. It's often called direct instruction. You often base it on Barack Rorschenstein's principles. It's a lot of questioning. That it does not mean lecturing. And I think that's absolutely crucial, because here in Sweden, we often hear katederundervisning, teacher-led learning, as being kind of, okay, the teacher is lecturing and then the kids are sitting there taking notes, and then they don't really talk, and they're passive. But nothing could be further from the truth, in the sense that these kids are probably more active. I've never seen such active kids as I've seen in your classrooms, and I've seen in Michaela's school, another No Excuse school in England, as I've seen in Dixon's Trinity Academy in Bradford, one of the most deprived schools in the areas of the country. It's incredibly active. It's just that the interactions are mostly between the teacher and the pupil. So it's basically question-led learning, question-led teaching. There is small snippets of pupil-to-pupil interaction, turn and talk, which is often used. But we're talking about 10, 30 seconds of pupil-to-pupil interaction, and then back to the teacher, and then questions. And so it's incredibly teacher-led, but also as a result of having this questioning technique, it becomes extremely engaging and motivating. Because you can't just be, it's really boring. Come on, I've been a student. I've done a PhD as well. It's not fun all the time to sit by yourself in the library or to listen to somebody else speak. You want to speak yourself as well, right? So this is much more, keeps it on your toes. It's really, when you enter one of these classrooms, you do get the sense this is possible. And I didn't know that this was possible before I saw it with my own eyes. The research corroborates that feeling. And I've actually done research on Rob's school. Now, for the first two cohorts, you weren't the principal then, or you weren't the head teacher back then. But I do find strikingly positive effects. It's just published, actually, in the Economics of Education Review, which has been accepted, as well as the school up in Bradford. So I've done my own research, but it supports the research that's been done over the past 10, 15 years in America. It's an incredibly good model. And it's an incredibly good model for kids from a disadvantaged background and kids with various forms of special needs, which I think is one of the biggest or most important comments that I get. Oh, what about the kids with special needs? Now, the research from Boston charter schools that have subscribed to this type of model is incredibly clear. The ones who benefit the most are kids with special educational needs.
I thought we'd get back to that, but first a few words about what happens in the classroom. Because when you started off, Rob, by describing how they line up in the schoolyard, you have the silent transitions. But just as Gabriel mentioned, it's actually what happens in the classroom is a main feature of this.
Yes.
Do you want? And you're also a history teacher. What do you want to give us an idea of, as a teacher, how does this play out in the classroom, and what do you do with these whiteboards, mini whiteboards?
So I think Gabriel's already given an impression of what the teaching approach is like, in that it's teacher-led, but with a huge amount of pupil-teacher interaction. That's the really important point for people to realise, is teacher-led does not mean a university-style lecture. We are trying to ensure that the pupils are cognitively active the whole time. Now, active learning was quite a fashionable term in English schools, 10, 20 years ago, and it meant they needed to be doing something to be learning. They needed to be making a presentation on sugar paper, or they needed to be cutting and sticking, or they needed to be doing group work, and we don't believe in that at all. We don't think they need to be, physically active. They need to be cognitively active. So huge amounts of questioning, turn and talk, where they're talking in pairs at repeated points throughout the lesson, and then these whiteboards. So this has been transformational, I think, in terms of English pedagogy. And it was something that I saw in other schools. I thought it was a gimmick. I thought it was a bad idea. And I had to give in after I saw it working in so many places and introduced it. And it's now something that everyone at school adores. It's brilliant. And the principle is very simple. Every pupil has a mini whiteboard and a whiteboard pen. And when you are doing a recap in the lesson, instead of doing hands up, which I think is the worst approach because you allow all of the sort of most dominant kids to hog the debate, you don't do hands up. You don't do cold call, because that's where you just pick a child at random. That's good, but you're still only hearing, we have classes of 26 on average, you're still only hearing 1/26 of the understanding with every question. Instead, you just ask a question, every pupil writes the answer on the mini whiteboard, and they simultaneously show them to you. And you as the teacher get to survey, and you get to give instant feedback. If you're asking them, a question about a simple mathematical procedure, and you're looking at it, you can say, nope, you confuse the two sides of the fraction. Nope, when you've done that, you've actually done the procedure for addition, it's multiplication. About half of you have got that correct. Okay, mini whiteboard's down. And in the space of 30 seconds, you can give feedback to a large proportion of the room. And it's totally low tech. There's no digital device involved, and it's transformational. I would say, and this is really getting down to the details in terms of how to run it, the reason I hated it for so long is I'd only ever seen it in schools where the whiteboards were handed out and the pens were handed out. And that would take 7 or 8 minutes. And I just thought it was lost learning time. I thought it was inefficient. I thought it was a gimmick. The game changer for us was when we went to schools where pupils have them themselves and they just carry them around lessons. And it comes back to no excuses as well, because the problem there often is the pupil won't have their mini whiteboard. And that's where you need to have a no excuses approach. If you don't have your mini whiteboard or your mini whiteboard pen, you don't have the equipment for the lesson, you go to detention at the end of the school day. And if you can guarantee you've got 915 kids at the school, all of them are travelling with a mini whiteboard, pen and board in their bag, it means you can do the most amazing teaching with almost zero sort of difficulty in setting it up. They just come perfectly equipped to learn in that way.
Fascinating. And related to this, we previously discussed a bit about the setting, that you have different you distinguish the students depending on how much they actually know.
Yeah.
How do you work with that in your school?
It's interesting. There's a real family of schools now who have this approach. We were one of the first free schools, and not one of the first schools to have this approach, but quite a high profile one. And I would say there's now, when we started it was probably dozens. I would say now it's out of 3,000 secondary schools, it's hundreds. Maybe not quite, the majority, but getting there. So there's a lot of us to share ideas who have this philosophy. But one of the main things that people disagree on is setting. And that's a really interesting one. And some schools have universal setting. Every pupil is an ability group for every lesson. Some schools have a mixture. We have almost all mixed ability. It's actually only mathematics where they're set. Science, they're set, but it's very broad. It's sort of 2 groupings as opposed to 1 to 5. We have 5 classes in every year group. Modern languages, French and Spanish, we set for in the last 2 years. But aside from that, everything is mixed ability.
Sounds quite a lot by Swedish standards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, do you know what? It's one of those things that I think the evidence is one of those things that there can be educational evidence on, and it tends to be quite mixed.
Yeah, no, I mean, the evidence on setting itself is not particularly helpful. I mean, setting by itself and grouping students by ability can be damaging, especially if it's inflexible.
Yeah.
So if it's flexible and it's just a way to group students together, and then say you after 6 or 7 or 8 weeks you have a test, and then you could mix them again, or after the 6 months, because kids learn differently. We know that. So it can be damaging if it's kind of like, okay, we set you now, and then you will never ever see each other again, or you have no ability to go up at the higher set. Now, where I think it might be beneficial is when you are teaching in the right way, basically direct instruction. That if you have too wide a kind of ability range in the classroom, it could be difficult to target and gear your teaching towards everybody. That's one of the when I speak to teachers about direct instruction and all that, I said, it's so difficult in a very diverse classroom where the kids, some of them don't know anything, some of them know loads. How can I do that? And I say, well, you could, and I think legally you can in Sweden as well, actually set, as long as it doesn't mean that this is forever. This is a forever thing. You can move between the sets, which is very important. Yeah. So you're right that the evidence itself, in terms of setting, is not particularly positive in terms of it definitely supports that it makes learning better in itself. But I don't think that's very interesting. It's more about how can you adapt teaching. So if you want direct instruction, how can you maximize the beneficial effects of direct instruction? And when I've seen, for example, Michaela School and Dixon's, they obviously do set, but it's not like we set. That's one of our main features. No, that's just it's to enable us to teach the way we want. Yeah. And they also make very clear, you are not allowed at Michaela School, you're not allowed to talk about sets with the kids. Please do not ask the kids which sets they're in, because they don't know. They haven't told them that they're smart or stupid, or that's not the point. It's just a way to ensure that the teaching can be geared more towards the teachers when you're teaching in whole class in a better way. Yeah. So I think it's one thing. It's not the most important thing here. So I don't think we should get stuck in the setting debate. Yeah. And it's really interesting to hear that you say, okay, it's not really. You don't think it's that important, but
but I think it's very important in certain subjects. Yeah. So I think hierarchical subjects where there is prior knowledge that you absolutely have to know to move on to the next step, I think you need setting. So mathematics, we set the whole way through. Okay. History, which is a more cumulative subject, you don't necessarily need to know. I mean, this year I'm teaching history to 14 and 13-year-olds, year 9 history. We're teaching about the First World War at the moment, and then we're moving on to teach about a unit on China. You don't necessarily need to know loads about the First World War to start understanding the unit on modern China. It's not the same. It's more cumulative. You're building knowledge as opposed to sort of hierarchically going through the steps. So subject like history, I'm very comfortable doing it. Mixed ability. I think maths, foreign languages, much more likely to set.
Very good. So should we move on and say a few words about the rules and the discipline and all of this? Because that tends to I think, focus on in a lot of the debate, at least here in Sweden, it's been focused on that. And I think one of the things I picked up in your presentation here earlier was that you're talking about rules being internalized by the students, but also by the teachers. Yeah. And in Sweden, your background is that we're now changing actually the law. Today, students have a veto on, the rules set by schools. And this is interpreted differently by different schools, but we're removing that veto anyway, saying that, teachers and principal adults should decide the rules. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the students shouldn't, internalize the rules. Obviously, they need to, understand that this is part of the school culture. Yeah. So it'd be very interesting to hear. I assume that students are not... How are they involved in setting the rules?
No, not at all. No. I think I think to run a successful school, you have to accept that there is a difference in authority between adults and children. You have to. And I think it's the original sin of bad schools is when they forget that and they think that they can run it on a sort of entirely egalitarian basis. So no, children do not have a role in setting the rules of the school, nor will they ever. But I would counter that by saying every single rule that we have at the school, we do for the children and we do in their own best interest. We don't ask for silent corridors because we as adults don't like the sound of children's voices. And we don't ask for uniform because we don't like the children expressing themselves in their own dress. Every single thing that we do is because we know that it will benefit the children. And we're in the luxury of being able to say that pretty conclusively because we're one of the highest performing schools in the country. And we can really, really have the moral justification for what we're doing because we're giving these children the best start in life. And when you first introduce a new rule, there is always a period of pushback from the students. They're not used to it. It will be, and our school has become, as we've been visited other schools and sought more inspiration from other No Excuses schools, our school has become stricter. And initially, there is always a tricky period of implementation. But you always eventually, if you do it correctly, get to the point of buy-in, where you know that the students understand the rule. They may not always like it, but they know that in their long term, it's in their best interest. And we're doing that currently. We've got a big new change that's starting in November, which is that we're entirely banning smartphones from the school site. Complete ban. If it's seen, it's going to be confiscated for 6 weeks. If we suspect a student has a smartphone on them, we will do bag searches. We are going to have absolutely no excuses of smartphones on the school site for reasons that I'm sure we don't need to go into. There's the tide's really turned on that debate, particularly in the UK. And we launched this to the pupils this week. So we're giving them 6 weeks to prepare for it. And when we first mentioned it to them, we could see there was pushback. And we had a queue in front of my colleague, Mr. McLaughlin, at lunchtime, about 15 pupils all waiting there to talk to him and ask some questions about it. And they don't like the change, but I know, because it's happened with other things that we've introduced, within a year or so, they will understand. There will be buy-in. It will be part of the school culture, and they'll fundamentally know it's in their best interest not to have that distraction and not to have...
Interesting.
Have to hold the line, as Catherine Burbos used to say. I mean, that's the thing. I think the key point there is internalization, because that makes sure that a school can run efficiently, and it can be you ensure kind of order and discipline in an efficient manner. You don't have to talk about the rules all the time. It's boring. Nobody wants to talk about rules, right? But once they accept them, they realize that actually for their benefit, you don't have to talk about them anymore because they just follow them naturally. And I think that's the key thing. These schools, they focus on by using rules, they change norms. Change behavior, and by changing behavior you also change norms again, so it becomes a part of what they believe, and that's exactly it. These are good things. It's a good thing to work hard and to show up on time and all of those things, so which is something that I think we have forgotten in the Swedish education system. We used to emphasize a lot of these kind of the educational or the educational role of schooling in terms of teaching kids these kind of norms, but we don't really do that anymore.
Character building, really.
I'm sorry.
Character building. Really.
Character building, exactly. It's character education. I mean, that's what it is. But it's not moral education in terms of you need to it's education by rules and ensuring that the rules become internalized and become norms. You just follow something. I mean, telling kids that it's important that you show up on time. It's not gonna do anything. Or telling kids, this is how we behave in the classroom. They're not gonna understand. You need to model. And once you model, they realize how they should behave, right? And then they follow that, and eventually becomes part of their own performance.
There's a sort of hackneyed old saying in England that you'll hear schools like this say, which is actions become habits, habits become character. And that's the process that pupils need to go through at these schools.
So what about the staff and the teachers? Because obviously they're part of this culture as well. We're talking about getting the students on board, but the teachers, they've chosen to work at your school. So is it, do they accept this? Do these changes? How do you get them on board, and how do they help to implement this?
There was a time when schools like us were first establishing themselves, when recruitment was quite hard, because what we were doing was so unusual that finding teachers who A, bought into what you were doing, and B, actually understood it was hard. We were sort of working it out as we went along. Now there is the sort of critical mass of similar schools that means that it's not difficult to find teachers who understand what we're doing and who like it. The other huge benefit is recruitment is incredibly easy when you run a school like ours. It's really easy because what do teachers want to do? They want to communicate the subjects that they love and they want to teach children. What conditions are the easiest for doing that in? Ones where pupils value their education and focus in lessons. So teachers are very keen to come and work at our school. We have almost, aside from a few subject areas which are difficult nationwide, we have almost no difficulty finding teachers. And I think one of the number one things that teachers, particularly ones who are new into the profession, care about most is the behaviour good enough for me to actually be able to teach? And when you can assure that in your school, teachers are going to want to come.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, you highlighted there. This is one of the. I mean, it was a product of the Free Schools program in England. So you obviously had new schools trying this, and I think that's important. I mean, that's the key issue. You need a shining light. You need a few shining lights to inspire others to make them realize what is actually possible. You don't have you need wholesale change, overhaul of the current education. It's not going to be impossible to do anyway. This idea we're going to change teaching in more direct in a direction of more direct instruction overnight in all schools in Sweden, it's not going to happen. Instead, allow schools to use it. And the same thing with the No Excuses model more generally. If you allow a few shining lights to appear, the rest will follow.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we're very glad that the new national curriculum that we're currently working on actually establishes that, teacher-led education, that is the way forward. It's quite unusual that they write it into the curriculum, but that will actually be the case here.
Right. Yeah.
There are a few more things we need to do. So, for example, since 1991, pupil influence over their education is still enshrined in the education law.
The law.
And that is not going anywhere as far as I can see currently.
Yeah.
Well, we can debate that as well. We are proposing some changes to that paragraph in the law, but not going far enough. So what we're saying now is that is what we'll do this period before the next election.
Okay.
And then we'll have to look into making an investigation again. What else do we need to change? Because there are a few things we need to change in our law to actually enable no excuses in Swedish context.
School uniforms illegal.
That's actually
here to stay.
That's right.
Yeah, that's quite easy to change though, if we wanted to. But it's not illegal in the sense that the education law stipulates that you cannot have a school uniform. It's because the law it's tied to freedom of speech. So it's part of the Swedish constitution, which means you can regulate it, but you need a paragraph in the education law saying the head teacher can decide a dress code within reasonable limits, whatever.
So,
but it's very
it's far away of Swedish school culture, I think. And so we're making some steps this period, and then I think we'll look into what works in the Swedish context. What can we pick from this to make it a Swedish model? I'm not sure we can copycat everything, but we'll have to find a way to make it suit our system. But we were talking about these rules. Obviously, that comes with consequences.
Yes.
And you briefly mentioned detention.
Yes.
Is that do you want to describe how does it work? And also, do you have other consequences? Or is that the one you use?
So our consequence system in lessons is that if you are off task, if you're distracting another student, we always talk about it in terms of learning. If you are stopping another student from learning, you have a warning. It's called a C1, consequence 1. If you do it again, you get a C2, which is a consequence 2. And that will lead you to having a half-hour detention after school. And that sounds scary and it sounds unpleasant. It's not. You don't get shouted at, you don't get humiliated. It's not a horrible experience, it's an inconvenience. You have to leave school half an hour later than all of your friends, and you have to do something really boring. You sit there and you write lines. We'll write a sort of, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. We'll write a sort of annoyingly motivational thing on the board. Tomorrow will be a brighter day than today, and they have to write it 60 times.
Right.
And they do that for half an hour, and then they leave. And if they misbehave twice, they'll do it for an hour. It can go up to an hour. If they get a detention lesson, they continue to misbehave, which is rare. But it does happen, and you need a consequence. If they continue to misbehave, they're removed from the class and they go to a separate room within the school that is run by 2 pastoral support staff who are very, very good at dealing with these trickier children. And they spend 3 periods, which is half a school day, there. And if they do well there and they respond well to the help from the support staff, they'll be reintegrated back into lessons. Yeah. So it's all designed around ensuring that teaching can always carry on unimpeded by pupils who are trying to stop it.
And obviously there is a backstop in the case of exclusions as well, which is very rare though.
Yeah.
And this is something that people often bring up when it comes to No Excuses School. It's, they have the ability to exclude and to suspend. And where do these kids end up? But I mean, the British system, you can obviously speak more about it, but first of all, it's incredibly rare. It rarely happens. It is a backstop. And this is the thing. Many of these things you don't really need in the day-to-day running of the school necessarily. Obviously, that's one of them. But if it's not there, it might be difficult to sustain the rest of the system.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe you want to highlight something about the just exclusion. I mean, it's very difficult to exclude anyway, right?
Yeah, it is difficult, but it's not impossible.
No.
And actually talking about legislative changes that are made by politicians, there are most of the No Excuses change that's happened in English schools has been cultural. It's been a shift amongst the teachers. It's been a few example schools that have really shone a light and are being emulated. But there have been some absolutely fundamental political changes that had to happen to enable it. One was you used to not be able to give detentions. The detention system that I'm describing used to be illegal. You had to give 24 hours notice to a parent before 2010 to keep their child behind after the finishing time, which meant you just couldn't really run a system like ours. So new government in 2010, they changed that in an Education Act that they passed almost immediately in coming into power. So that was great. That was really helpful for the profession. And the other one was exclusions. So you used to, if you excluded a school, the local government, irrespective of school type, used to be able to overrule that exclusion on appeal. If there was an appeal and they wanted to uphold that appeal, you could be forced to take back that pupil. You now no longer have to be forced to take back that pupil, but if it's overturned at appeal, you pay a fine, you pay a penalty. Now, it means that schools now are empowered to, if they think it's necessary to exclude a pupil, they can. We almost never exclude pupils. It is really, really rare. And the few times you can exclude pupils for accumulated negative behaviour, if they are just continually refusing to comply within lessons, you can exclude them. I can't remember the last time we excluded a pupil on that basis. The only exclusions that we've done in recent years have been for serious breaches of the behaviour policy. Weapons coming into school or really, really unpleasant, violent altercations. Thank goodness we haven't had one of those for a very long time, but they have happened in the past. That's where we've had to use exclusions. So very rare. Having said that, we're a school that sort of has got a very established culture and it's in the place where we want it to be. I have a good friend, former colleague, who's now leading a school in Yorkshire, in a city called Doncaster, not a very affluent part of the world, and this is the worst school in one of the toughest towns in England, and he's taken it over, and the levels of exclusions that he'll be putting in place there will be significant. And I think, sadly, that's necessary. I think if you're having to do a turnaround school and if you're having to change the culture in a school, you do have to do it in a more heavy-handed way.
Can you explain what happens to the kids when they're excluded?
Yeah, so excluded pupils will often go to another school in the local area. That will be the first port of call. And the local government, the local authority will run something called a fair access panel where all of the head teachers meet and they discuss the students who've been excluded from mainstream education and they'll find new places for them. And then the local head teachers who meet in these panels, they will get to know if a pupil has done 4 or 5 schools and just isn't able to cope in any of them. And a pupil in that situation will end up going to some form of AP, which stands for alternative provision. And those are schools that are set up particularly to deal with some of the hardest pupils. So yeah, that will be where they go. And it's a really difficult part of the education system because it's going to some of them are brilliant. Some of these alternative provision schools are fantastic and will really make a life difference for these pupils, but it is putting all of the toughest pupils in one place, which does obviously have negative consequences. But it's a really tricky problem. You know, where do the hardest pupils go? But I think fundamentally you have to make peace with the fact that you can't have a inflexibly inclusive approach at the detriment to pupils in a mainstream school. If you take an absolute doctrinaire position that we never have any exclusions whatsoever, you are valuing a tiny minority over the benefit of the great majority of students in your school system, and that's problematic.
Again, it's a backstop. It also changes the norms. If you know you can be excluded, it's a completely different story.
Yeah. Exactly.
So again, I've seen the chart in England. You know what you have to do in order to exclude. It's not that easy.
No.
And often schools have to accept other excluded students. So it's often that they change students as well.
Yeah, that's the level before exclusion. Is you'll often actually kind of short circuit that process and do a managed move where you bring up a head teacher in another school and you say, look, I think they could do fine at your school, but they need a fresh start and they need to leave the peer group who they're currently with. And you'll often do a swap of pupils in that context. So that, and it's really difficult to go through with a full-scale exclusion, but so it should be. It should be difficult. Yeah. It's a big decision to make, and you should have to really demonstrate that it's necessary.
I thought we would move back to special needs. Gabriel, you mentioned that earlier, and it's one of the big kind of arguments we get in the debate here in Sweden when talking about about these schools. So what is your first, Rob? What is your experience? How do you work with pupils with special needs? How does it work in reality in classroom?
So in the classroom, our philosophy is that good teaching is good teaching. And we have all sorts of additional help and provision for pupils with special educational needs. Ones with very severe needs will have a teaching assistant with them who's side by side with them in the lesson helping them. We have a room in the school where pupils with special educational needs can go if they are autistic pupils or pupils who can be overstimulated by a big busy school. They can go there as a calm place. We do interventions before school and at break time where pupils can have additional help, guided reading with older pupils, that sort of thing. For pupils who really struggle with literacy and numeracy, they have a slightly altered timetable where they do more maths and English than their peers. But in terms of the actual teaching in the classroom, I think that the belief that pupils with autism or ADHD or anxiety need a different style of teaching is a myth. It's wrong. Good teaching is good teaching. They will benefit just as well as all of their peers from evidence-led approaches. In fact, they will benefit more. You know, if you have ADHD and you're easily distracted, what's a better classroom to be in? A really calm classroom where pupils are engaged and the teacher is orchestrating the learning, or one with group work and discovery learning where all of the pupils are firing off doing different things? And what's going to be better for your concentration?
Right.
No, I mean, that's what the evidence suggests as well, as I highlighted. I mean, the fact is also that once you are lottered into one of these schools, if you win the lottery in some of these charter schools in America, you're more likely to lose your special educational needs staff. Right. So you're less likely to get targeted support. You get more high quality education, and you perform much better than the kids who get that targeted support. Yeah. So unfortunately, a lot of this kind of stuff that we built our education system around in the past 10, 15 years, I'm not even sure it's been any laws. Yeah, I guess there must have been in the previous education law from 2011, this whole thing about differentiation and differentiated instruction. So today we have a situation where a teacher with, say, 30 kids in the classroom has to provide different types of instruction depending on their special educational need. And obviously when it comes to autism, ADHD is obviously a common one. You might have quite a few ones, and they all need different types. They might sit and read in a corner when the rest of the lesson is going on, and the other kids are doing something completely different. Yeah. They have headphones on. It's completely mad. Yeah. But for some reason, and obviously actually something that the current government now is doing is to abolish that requirement, which I do think is necessary, and it's getting a lot of pushback from special educationalists. The evidence base of whom is complete nonsense. I mean, there's so much poor research out there on what these kids need. When you look at the actual gold standard randomized evidence, these kids thrive in schools which provide very high quality general type education, exactly like your own. That's it. You don't need to make, it's not rocket science really, but they want to make it rocket science clearly. They want the teachers to provide 15 different instructional styles in the same classroom at the same time. Do you understand how disruptive it is for the teacher? I've walked around the class, I don't understand how you can work like that.
Yeah. And a lot of teachers can't work like that.
They can't.
They leave the profession.
They leave the profession.
Fundamentally an impossible expectation to set for a teacher. Yeah, it's just not possible.
But I think one of the, and so we're changing that as exampasning, it's called in Swedish, which forces the teacher to actually adjust education after every pupil in the classroom. And instead, in the lower classes, we're introducing different screening tests. We don't have that today, but screenings to check what level are they at, and then give them small study groups on the side with an extra teacher. Teacher-led education. Extra time, that's what they need. And we're now changing the law, and that's one of the big things we're now prioritizing the budget for next year.
I can highlight that that's also one thing. I mean, I forgot about that, but there's obviously one thing that's often highlighted about the No Excuses model is, yes, special small group tutoring or teaching if it's needed.
Yeah.
And take them out of the classroom. Now, I think it's not the most essential ingredient because it differs a lot between the American context and the English context. I mean, as I said, setting is another version. I mean, it's another way of ensuring this kind of more targeted teaching. But obviously, if it's needed, it's needed. So it's much better than forcing a teacher to teach in 15 different instructional styles. Oh God! I mean, it's a no-brainer. Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I started my career, that expectation, differentiation was one of the key things they always looked for in your lessons. I never knew how I was supposed to be doing it. You're pretend.
How were you doing it? I mean, what did you? I mean,
when there was no one in my classroom, I wasn't. I knew that it was mad. And when there was someone in my classroom, I had to. You paid lip service to it, but you never had real conviction that it was actually working. It was a performance.
What would you say? Because I think the main worry in Sweden, I meet as politicians from parents of children of special needs that say that, they're worried because the Sweden school system is obviously not working for them. There are a lot of children today that are leaving school, just sitting at home, refusing to go to school, and it's a growing group. This is a huge issue here. It doesn't matter that you're obliged to go to school. Well, I don't feel well, I stay at home because school doesn't work for me. And I think these parents, they're very worried that No Excuses talking about discipline and the idea of that circulates in media makes them very worried that their pupils, their children will be even worse off in a model like this. So what would you say to these parents to kind of ensure them that No Excuses would actually be the best for their children?
That's a really good question, and it's really, really tough. It's you have when you're running a school as a head teacher, there are the aspects of your culture that you can influence and that you can control, and there are the aspects that you can't. And parents is definitely one of them. And I think that ultimately, if you're, say for example, you're running a school and you're trying to implement this new approach, that is going to be one of the biggest struggles. But if you hold the line and if you accept it as a battle and you really work hard for it, ultimately you will do better and you will have that evidence proof for parents that the school is succeeding and that it's the right place for their child to go, and you will get buy-in from parents as well as students. That's the ultimate destination, but the road to getting there is undeniably difficult. And those are conversations that we still have, less now, but we still have a lot, which are parents with children who are school refusers or children who struggle with the approach of the school and trying to win them round. But fundamentally, you just have to have confidence in what you're doing. There's nothing. Our school is an extremely warm school. That's a phrase we use. It's warm, strict. It's strict, but it's warm. It's a very loving atmosphere. Everything that we do is geared towards children succeeding. And if you're convinced yourself that you have the moral authority, you will be able to have that conversation. But it is difficult. It's undeniably difficult.
I would just highlight that this problem has arisen in the past 10, 15 years, especially in line with lower and lower expectations for children. If you set low expectations, children adapt.
Yeah.
And if they start saying, okay, well, you don't have to go to school if you don't feel well or whatever. I'm not saying that this is something, that this is the fault of the parents. It's obviously have a cultural issue here that is permeating everywhere. I mean, it's not just a Swedish thing that you want to make it easier and you don't want to have them to have a bad time. And if going to school means having a bad time, well, then we remove that hurdle from them. But this is character education. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem because once these schools are up and running, once they start, they're often much more beneficial for these children. Yeah. This is the whole point. But yes, you're right. Before we get there, before the school is actually changed in that direction, there might be some struggle. Yeah. There might be a struggle. Yeah. But ultimately, the best type of education, less bullying, less distractions, where you can focus on learning is obviously going to be much better for these children. Yeah. And setting high expectations. This is ultimately a cultural issue. Do not see yourself as a victim. If there's anything, Catherine Burbelsing at Michaela School, she holds parental evenings saying you shouldn't see yourself as a victim. Victimhood is really bad. You should see yourself as an empowered individual. So these are also the norms that these schools instill in the children attending them. Yeah. So this is, again, it can definitely, I suspect, I mean, obviously I can't really highlight any specific research on hemmasittare in this context, but it's a model that definitely chimes well with terms of who benefits from them. Well, the more disadvantaged, the kids are less motivated, all of that stuff. Yeah. They tend to benefit from this type of model. It's just we need to get going. We can't just wait. We need to get a few shining lights up there that can show the way, and then we can build on them.
Yeah. And again, we've got the evidence, all schools have school refusers, and there are school refusers in our school community, but we have better than local attendance records, we have better than national average attendance records. Our attendance isn't 100%, but it's much better than the national average. And that's you will find the same of No Excuses schools around the country. So our critics would have a point if No Excuses schools really struggled with attendance. They don't.
Can I say, actually, I withdraw. I retract my comment. I have actually done research on absences.
Oh, right.
Sorry. So yes, your school and Dixon's then up in Bradford, they do decrease absences. Okay. So sorry. Okay. I don't know. Obviously, we're talking about that specific group of students, but yes, it does. They do tend to decrease absences and also pupil movement. So that's another thing which is critical, signifying or indicating that these schools are quite good in the sense that one of the most disruptive things is if you actually have to change the school. So structural changes in the system is quite disruptive for kids. So for example, if you change between primary and secondary, it's actually better to be in an all-through school situation. We have a lot of those in Sweden. But in any case, what we find is for these two schools in England, if you're lotted into one of them, you're much more likely to finish your GCSEs, actually sit the GCSEs at the school than if you lost the lottery. So again, they tend to move schools. They're not satisfied with the schools, and they obviously, and that might be one of the reasons why they do well, because they're actually keeping them at school. So I retract my comment. There is evidence for lower absences and also lower pupil mobility between schools.
Excellent. Time flies. I have one final topic I want us to discuss, and that's value added.
Yes.
Since that's something we can't measure in Sweden today, we don't know how much extra knowledge do the pupils get from a certain year at a certain school. We want to introduce that. We're changing the grading system. We're introducing external grading, external marking of national tests. We don't have that yet. It's the students' current teachers that mark the national tests. So it's hard to use that. The tests change every year, so it's hard to compare them throughout that 8 years, etc. So we have a big data problem in Sweden. But this is something you worked on in the UK, and I know also you worked on your previous role when you worked for the previous education minister, Nick Gibbs, where you introduced policies around a national program relating to value added. So do you want to say a few words about how does this work in the UK? What was the policy you introduced? And also, how does your school stand out?
So it's funny, coming and visiting other countries, you gain a real perspective on your own education system. And even though when I first became a teacher in 2011, I thought English education system was pretty broken and needed the free schools policy and needed the academies policy, there was one thing that already existed, which was really powerful and really important, which is for generations, we have had nationally set, externally marked assessments. We've had A-levels at 18 since the 1940s. GCSEs at 16 were introduced in 1986, I think. at the end of primary school, aged 11. National curriculum exams were introduced in 1991. So, long before I was even thinking of becoming a teacher, this already existed. So that's really beneficial because that's a basis on which you can actually do some really good comparisons of school performance. That data always existed. However, the measures to measure school performance were very poor before 2010. I won't go into why, but they were easy to manipulate. It was easy for you to actually sort of play the statistical game quite a bit. And whenever someone said, look at this school results, look at how they're doing, the next question was always, oh yeah, what did they do? It was never, wow, they're doing really well. It was always like, yeah, what clever tricks have they done?
A lot of focus on threshold kids.
Yeah.
So the main measure of success was A star to C, the share of pupils, basically the share of students getting a passing grade.
Yeah. So you could basically focus all of your efforts on the pupils who were potentially going to pass, and you could boost your school's performance that way. So there was a big reforming government in terms of education, took office in 2010, and changes to the performance measures has been absolutely fundamental. I think, in fact, in terms of if you're ranking all of the reforms that they did, I would definitely put that in the top 5, maybe even the top 3. It's huge. And one of the best things that they did is they brought in a value-added measure, which is really easy to understand and has now become common currency amongst teachers. Hasn't quite filtered through to parents. They don't quite understand this measure, but all teachers and people working within the profession get it. And it's essentially how well do pupils do age 16 compared to how they were doing at 11. And it looks at their average grade across 8 exams that they take age 16. And it compares that to how pupils at the same starting point did nationwide. So nationwide, this score is 0, norm to 0. If you have a score of 1, your pupils are doing on average 1 grade better than peers at the same starting point. If it's -1, they're doing 1 grade worse. It's called Progress 8. And it is now the first thing that anyone really goes to get a first impression of how secondary school's doing. And it's really crucial to a no excuses debate because if you have a absolute attainment measure, people can always say, well, it's because, they're doing really well because they're in a nice, prosperous suburb. And of course they're doing badly because they are in a disadvantaged area. Or you have the situation where a school has a grade, an absolute attainment grade that looks like they're doing badly, but if you actually consider the starting point, they're the best school in the local area. So this value-added score has been transformational. And yeah, if you have a 1, you're doing a grade better on average. It hasn't come out yet for this year. And sadly, it never will because 5 years ago was COVID and the pupils didn't take their exams at primary school when they're age 11. So they're now the ones taking their GCSEs. So we think we'd have got our best value-added measure ever this year. Last year, we got 0.97. So it was almost 1.
Yeah.
The best school in the country for value added is Michaela that we've been talking about. They're 2.5.
Yeah.
Which is just extraordinary.
2.5 grades on average across about 10 grades.
Yeah.
I mean, better than the national average.
0.97, that was in the top 100 for the country out of 3,200 secondary schools. So we were pleased with that.
Yeah.
But then, you look at what some other schools are doing, you think, and it's great. You look at what they're doing, you think, goodness me, we're doing well, but there's so much more that we could still be doing. And I think if you want a cultural change in schools, you really need a measure like that everyone can trust. It's not perfect. There are things about it that are a bit, hide things, but it's good enough to really start to shape the debate.
You should never make perfect the enemy of the good, which is often what happens in this debate. Of course, we could create value-added metrics based. I mean, I've done it myself. Based on the current performance measure, I think I agree that they're compromised by this lingering kind of feeling that maybe there's some there is differences in marking behind the differences in scores. So definitely external examinations are absolutely crucial. But like this, even when you talk about that, there are always going to be people who say, "Oh, but it's not perfect. It can be manipulated this way." And yes, it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
It's better than the other option.
Yeah.
And research actually, I mean, the guy who put it in, Simon Burgess, was the academic who was commissioned to create it. I've written a paper with him on something completely different on how immigrant students in England perform, because they perform actually better than historically, and their motivation and so on. But no, it's a really important thing that has changed the system for the better. So they have done research on seeing what happened afterwards. This phenomenon that you mentioned, that you focus on the marginal student, basically just under or just above, meant obviously you forgot about the ones who were far below the threshold, and those also who were higher, much far above the threshold. And there is research suggesting that changed. So they started to focus more kids higher up in the distribution and lower down in the distribution benefited from this change. So it is a more equal way, I would say, to measure school performance, and it produces. I think it's a fairer way to measure school performance. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's not too far off by the sound of it. The system we have in Sweden at the moment, the problem we have with the E-level, which is the current passing grade, which is what most schools focus on to get students just above that threshold, whereas the students below and above are
threshold measures terrible.
It's even higher. The consequences are even higher here, because you can't for a while you haven't been able to enter upper secondary school if you don't have passing marks first until 2011. I think it was math, Swedish, and English, and now I think it's 5 other subjects or something like you need passing marks. So if you don't get a passing mark, you can't enter the next. So I think Sweden, it is fascinating when you look at in PISA the share of kids who finish compulsory education without being eligible for further education. It's the highest in Europe. I think, was it the highest?
15%.
Yeah. So obviously England doesn't really have that kind of threshold. You can, if the school takes you can start an A-level, right? You don't need to have a specific GCSE. It's up to the school, right? Yeah. Whereas here it's not. You can't continue. You need to get that passing mark before you go further.
So we're changing that as well. So we're making a lot of reform in a lot of areas. Also, I'm sitting here with your very recent book, which you've written together with Nick Gibbs about some of the reforms you helped to introduce when he was Minister of Education. So Reforming Lessons it's called, where you can read about this Progress 8 among other things. So we're very much looking forward to dig into that. Thank you so much. I mean, God, we've been talking for quite a while now, but very interesting conversations. Thank you so much for coming. Very grateful for that and for giving us some very valuable insights into these issues, hoping to actually inspire some reform also in Sweden in these areas. So thank you, Rob and Gabriel, for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Stort tack för er som har tittat. Vi har gett er här ett gott exempel på en skola som har fantastiska resultat i Storbritannien, som använder just No Excuses som sin modell och dessutom får ta del av en hel del av den aktuella forskningen på det här området som styrker varför vi vill göra det lagligt i Sverige för skolor att kunna arbeta efter den här metodiken. Mer om det kommer här senare i höst. Tack för att ni har tittat.